Hey, this is Heather, and I'm a producer on They Also Served. I've got a couple announcements for you today. 4 things. First, thank you so much for listening. Second, if you're enjoying the show and you want to help us get the word out, just share it with one person you think would like the show. Could be a friend, your grandma, an acquaintance, someone you know who loves learning about history and untold stories, especially of women. There's someone out there that is just waiting to listen to a podcast like this. Help us find them. Third, we have a bunch of bonus content over on the They Also Served social media pages. This includes photos of all the women we discuss on the podcast, links to interesting articles, and tidbits we weren't able to cover in the episodes. You can find the show on both Instagram and Facebook at They Also Served Pod. Okay, last one, I promise. Fourth and finally, if you want to help us out another way, just rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This helps us to get the word out and find more listeners. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening to the show and for helping us get the word out about the project. Now, here's this week's episode. We hope you enjoy.
Her hair grew gray in the service of the cause she loved, but still she pressed on. Between the ages of 48 and 50, she learned the Chinese language, learned it well enough to pass the second-year university examination. This heroine, whose Christian life and works compare well with the most famous records of mission annals, visited 4 continents, made 9 long sea voyages, learned 7 languages. Her influence was always for the right, witnessing for the truth she believed. Milton G. Conger, in an obituary for Petra Tunheim, in the Australasian Record.
Hi, I'm Heidi, a historian and host of They Also Served, where we discover the lives of little-known women who made a big impact on Christianity in America and around the world. Petra could have lived an ordinary life, but she ended up living an extraordinary one. She died on a ship to Singapore, traveling back to the island that she loved, Java. But she was born far from Java in Norway. Her childhood was far from extraordinary. She was born to an ordinary couple with already a large family in an ordinary town in Norway. As a child, she cared for her family's sheep and tried to keep up with her 9 older brothers and sisters. At 17, her life took one of the many turns that would make it extraordinary and lead to her living on 4 continents and learning 7 languages.
She went to US when she was 17 years old, I think in 1888. She went to US because her 4 siblings, 4 brothers, were there.
This is Donny Chrissutianto. He's a professor in church history at the Adventist seminary in the Philippines. Before becoming a professor, Donny was a pastor in Java, the island that became so dear to Petra. But we're getting ahead of the story. After the Civil War in the United States, sparsely settled Western states recruited immigrants to farm and build industries in them. 4 of Petra's siblings had immigrated to Minnesota, and Petra followed them. 3 years later, Petra attended Union College, a then relatively new Seventh-day Adventist college in Lincoln, Nebraska. While there, she joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. After she left Lincoln, she taught elementary school.
Tunheim is her family name, but she married, and so that's why in the early record of Adventist history in Indonesia, she was called as Petra Tunheim. Tunheim is the family name of her husband at the time.
The marriage was not a success. They married in Minnesota in 1897 and lived afterwards in North Dakota for 2 years before moving to Alberta, Canada. They separated in 1902, divorcing officially a few years later. Petra never married again and took up colporteuring, in other words, selling books door to door. But she was eager to serve God, and she was ready for a change.
She went to Australia as missionary after reading a 1903 General Conference Bulletin. So there was calling in 1903 to go to Australia, and she went there. And in Australia, she was a successful confessor.
While in Australia, Petra sold religious and health-related periodicals. She reported selling 12,000 copies of one periodical, Signs of the Time, in 1 year in Sydney, an impressive amount for any colporteur. And her life would have been extraordinary for a woman at the turn of the 20th century. After all, at this point, she'd already lived on 3 continents. But what she's most famous for was yet to come. In 1906, she was asked to try her hand at a new mission field.
Petra Tunheim is very famous because she is the first missionary to Java, Indonesia. Java is the most populous island in the world. Even though Ralph Waldo Munson is the first missionary to Indonesia, but he went to Sumatra, another island. But the first missionary, there were 3, and one of them is Petra Tunheim. She dedicated her life in the missionary work, and I think it's more than 1/3 of her life.
Indonesia was a daunting mission field.
Indonesia is the number 1 archipelago country in the world because we have more than 17,000 islands. And we have 3 different zone time, like the United States. From 17,000, we have about 6,000 islands. There's no population, there's no one live in that islands. Java is the most important island in Indonesia because the capital city is there, and more than 60% of Indonesian population live in Java. And we have more than 270 million people in Indonesia, and it's now counted as after China, India, United States, Indonesia is the 4th one. So it's a big country with big population, but Java is only about 2,000 kilometers, and more than 100 million people live in the same island. So you can imagine that how crowded this island. Yeah. Indonesia also the biggest Muslim population in the world. Even though we are not Muslims country, because someone can be converted to Christian or other religion, but Muslim is 85%. At the time, we were still colonized by Dutch at the time. And when she arrived in 1906, well, Muslim still as the major religion at the time. The percentage in 1906 was higher than 85%. Now Muslim is 85% or 86% in Indonesia, but at the time Muslim was higher than now. So we can imagine that it was hard, especially for female foreigners. So Petra Tunheim traveling from one tip of Java to another. And in many parts, because 1/3 area that she traveled at the time, I was as pastor. So I know the demography. For example, when she arrived in Indonesia was Surabaya. Surabaya is the 2nd largest city in Indonesia after Jakarta. So I grew up in Surabaya. And then when she opened churches in Central Java, I was as pastor in Central Java for 13 years. So I traveled where she went and opened the work and shared the message, where she went to selling book and also give Bible studies.
The Dutch had originally sailed to what is now Indonesia to gain a monopoly on the lucrative trade in nutmeg, cloves, black pepper, and cinnamon. What had originally started as a commercial enterprise had devolved into a colonial one by the 19th century. Petra was stepping onto an island where government business was transacted in Dutch, but the language of the people she was really there to minister to was quite different. and travel in the interior was difficult and could be dangerous. There were tropical diseases like malaria, dangerous animals, and roads washed out by seasonal monsoon rains. So she needed to develop some new skills rapidly.
I went to the cities where she went. It is interesting to see that even when I was as pastor, it's not easy. When she went to Indonesia in 1906, since that time, she learned Dutch and Malay, now is Bahasa Indonesian language, and also the local language, Javanese, the language that I speak when I went back to Java. So she can speak 5 languages. All missionary says that Javanese is difficult language because when I have conversation with the older man, yeah, I speak with one language and the older man will speak or answer me with another language. So this is the way because I cannot use the same language with him because he is older. So this is the way we communicate. So for example, I talk with my children here, with Nicholas and Keisha. I speak in one language in Java and they should speak not at the same language because it is not polite. They should answer me in different language, but we understand each other. So that's why some missionaries, not only Petra Tunheim, but also J.A. Wood and Anna Nordstrom said that this is the most difficult language.
Language wasn't the only barrier for Petra's mission work.
Even until now, if I notice, it's very seldom a woman can very briefly penetrate Java land. Even now, it's hard because Muslim culture in Java, especially. Moreover, 100 years ago, in her letter to Australian Union, I can see that so many barriers at the time in doing evangelism in Java, even more than now. But she was brave enough to traveling from one part to another and then to entering house to house and then selling books. And it is not in Indonesian language. She was the first missionary who bring the Adventist message. Well, later on, after I think we have the first publishing house in 1910. In 1910, then we have the first tracts in Indonesian in Malay language. Before that time, only in English. And she was very successful in doing that. Why we should remember her? Because she was very brave and she devoted her life to serve the Lord. This is what I can see. She spent more than 1/3 of her life foreign missionary. 3 years in Australia and almost 70 years in Indonesia.
We've talked a lot about how unique Petra was. Although her experience was unique, she was not the only woman who worked in remarkable ways for God in Indonesia and Shanghai. Anna Nordstrom partnered with Petra in her first years in Java. Anna, a trained nurse, treated medical conditions to whomever needed them and colported alongside Petra. In 1909, Anna married another missionary, George Wood. She and George spent the rest of their lives working in Java. During that time, Anna served as a secretary-treasurer for the mission and intermittently ran small clinics and schools as well. In her later years, she opened a home for the blind. She died in 1942, just before the Japanese captured the area. George died in 1944 in a Japanese prison camp. Emmanuel, the first Indonesian convert, worked with Petra briefly, but poor health forced him to leave Java too. Besides other missionary women, there's another worker that's often overlooked, the Bible woman. The concept of Bible women really started when male missionaries to China and India found that it was culturally unacceptable for them to even speak to women of the middle and upper classes. They realized that the only avenue to evangelize women were other women. Joseph Lee, a professor at Pace University, and Suzanne Patrick, an associate professor at Nazarene Theological Seminary, spoke to us a little bit about the role of Bible women.
They were actually family evangelists. They were family evangelists who joined the church at a much more senior age. Usually they joined the church when they were in their 30, 40, or even, older. And they received some training from women missionary, and then they decided to work for the Western mission or Chinese churches as evangelists. And the Bible woman is actually a very general title that actually describes many, many different natures of work undertaken by this, female convert. Some work for the women missionary as interpreter. It actually helped foreigners to cross the linguistic boundary to spread the religious message to women and children in the traditional Chinese home. At that time, it was still very much a patriarchal society, so it was impossible for a male missionary to access the private domain of a Chinese home. So I think women missionary and also male missionary, they always travel with this, women evangelists called the Bible woman in order to speak to the female faith seekers, the female members, of the congregation. Some of these Bible women, after they received training, they also joined the mission institution to work as a full-time evangelist in the school and also in the medical institution.
They also conducted prayer meetings, and also they knocked on doors and evangelized in the village. So they really played a role in sharing the gospel with others.
Chinese merchants had long traded with the Javanese, and some settled there permanently. And it was not considered much more appropriate in Java than in China for foreign men, or at least strangers, to talk to women. So it's unsurprising that Petra too seems to have adopted the idea of working with Bible women in Java. We don't know most of their names, but we do know of one woman's name, Kui Neo. Amongst her many duties, Petra trained Bible women.
I think there's no more prominent woman than Petra Tunheim in that time. Because in addition of Petra Tunheim, I just found Anna Wood, and there are some others missionary, but they only for temporary, for 3 years, 5 years the most, but not like Petra Tunheim spent 1/3 of her life in Indonesia. One thing that I want to share with you, in 1912, there were some other converts for Adventists. At the time, when Samuel Rantung just converted in 1912, Samuel Rantung is the one who spread the Adventist message in the east part Indonesia, that now most of the Seventh-day Adventists is there. But when he was converted, Petra Tunheim was there already and helped in the conversion. We can see that most of the work of Petra Tunheim was in Java, but her influence through the converts, to the new converts, it's spreading to all over the country. One thing that I can see from Petra Tunheim, she was patient in doing discipleship. And this is very important. She knows that she has limitations, and she worked much with the local, or she created by discipling them to be a missionary, and then these people, they become missionary wherever they go. She did not just work alone, but also she did training, and not only training for local people. Even you saw the Chinese women. The Chinese woman, Sim Jinio, she could not sell any book. But Petra Tunheim, because before she came to Indonesia, she was one of the most successful literature evangelist in Australia. She was there for 3 years. And in 1 month, she could sell 1,000 tracts in only 1 month and books. And in 1 year, more than 12,000. So that's why when she went to Indonesia, the way she reached Indonesian people by doing literature evangelism.
Petra understood the urgency of having local Bible workers because of an event in 1907, shortly after she arrived. At the time, the missionaries thought they should avoid all medications, including quinine. It was a fatal mistake. A particularly virulent strain of malaria broke out in the Teasdale family, the other missionaries officially licensed by the church in Java. They lost their young son Lawrence to the disease. The boy's mother and aunt fell seriously ill but survived. The experience of losing a son, though, seems to have done long-term damage, and the Teasdales ended up returning to the United States to recover. Petra also suffered greatly from the illness. Her skin turned purple, and it caused Petra to seek out property in a cooler climate.
And it was in the highland. So why we purchased this, according to Petra Tunheim, because there are many missionaries, they were sick, and because of the climate, so they need a safe haven, they said. So they went to mountainsides and they bought this. And the union, Australian Union, bought this for Indonesia. Since that time, we have our property. And all the decision in the early years of evangelism in Indonesia, they made it in this land. They gathered together from all over missionary in Indonesia, from Sumatra, from Java, from different islands. They met together in this land and they decide the leaders and they also train. And according to Petra Tunheim, this place also they use as clinic because many people came there and our missionary nurse they treat them. And then after that, not only people surround that village, but also all missionaries, when they have problem with health, they just come and have a recovery there.
But the Teasdale family tragedy also reminded missionaries of the importance of training their replacements. Donny told us that Petra trained both men and women as Bible workers.
Not only as the literature evangelism, but in doing Bible studies. There was a time in Indonesia where only Petra Tunheim is the only Bible workers in the whole country. Especially after 1912, when most of the missionary back to their respective country because of tropical diseases. There was only Petra Tunheim that practically worked as the Bible workers because the other missionary who stayed in Indonesia at the time, they were as a nurse. And even Petra Tunheim helped them also in giving treatment. In 1908, she went to Central Java. In Central Java, she went to different part of Central Java, Semarang, Salatiga, Yogyakarta, and Solo, these big cities. And she reported that she sold 160 books, a ministry of healing, from she bought it 150 and 116 in only 3 weeks, even until today.
Petra was so dedicated to literature evangelism that the first words she learned in Bahasa were Buku Baca 5 sen, which means good book 5 cents, so that she could sell a translation of Ellen White's writings in Indonesian. But beyond being a colporteur, Petra held another important position.
She was the first president of mission in Indonesia. It was in 1913 to 1915. And maybe she was the first female president of mission outside North America. In 1912, Ralph Waldo Munson left Indonesia, and there were only 2 missionary licenses. The first one was Petra Tunheim, and the second one was G.A. Wood. G.A. Wood was the president of mission in East Java. And Petra Tunheim was the president of mission, not only president, in the yearbook, she was mentioned as director, but now we call it as president of mission. And not only as president, but also as the treasurer at the same time.
Serving in missions where there were few Adventists and the mission was new allowed women to move into positions of leadership.
Why he ceased from the position? Because she was sick. And this is a common thing for missionary came to Indonesia during the time because the climate is very different, it's so hot. And also, usually they infected by malaria. And it's very hard for missionaries at the time. Some of them, they died because of the tropical diseases. And Petra Tunheim was sick because of this.
In 1916, Petra went to the United States on furlough, in part to recover her health and in part to conduct fundraising campaigns. For much of her missionary life, she did a great deal of fundraising to finance her position. She returned full of energy to her post, but it was to be short-lived. 2 years later, she was so ill that the mission field sent her back to the United States again to recover.
She never reached United States in 1923 because she stopped in China and we had hospital there.
In Shanghai, she recovered at the large Adventist hospital there. But her time of recovery was not a time of idleness. She learned Chinese to better minister to the Chinese in Java when she returned. She colporteured and gave Bible studies. One of the women Petra began working with during her recovery was Grace Hisu. Grace herself became an active Bible worker in Shanghai. But shortly after she met Grace, Petra was invited back to Java.
But she wants to coming back to Indonesia. In the way, when the ship reached Singapore, she died there. At the end of her life, she tried to collect a fund to build the first organized church in Indonesia. We call it now Kramat Pulo Church, but actually the English name is Petra Tunheim Memorial Church.
One of her legacies is that church. She wanted to live to see the church dedicated. But while in Shanghai, she had been diagnosed with cancer. She knew she was dying, but she wanted to die in the place that she had made her home with the people she loved and who loved her. So she got on a boat to try to return to Java. She never made it off the boat, dying en route of pneumonia on August 13, 1923. Charles H. Watson, as vice president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the 1920s and president in the 1930s, traveled to Asia several times. On one such visit, Watson traveled to Java for the church's dedication. He was shocked at the beauty of the church. It had red octagonal tiles and gray polished marble floors. When he questioned the superintendent of the mission how they could afford such a beautiful building, the superintendent responded, "All these tiles and marble have been given to us in memory of Miss Tunheim, and the donors have even sent their craftsmen to do the work as a token of their affection for her."
One of the cornerstones of the church building that she wanted so earnestly to see completed bears the inscription, "In Memoriam of Petra Tunheim."
In the first few years after her death, Petra's tomb did not go unvisited. Watson recalled that every time he visited Singapore, always I made a pilgrimage to Miss Petra's grave. I used to feel that I was looking at the resting place of a saint. I would remove my hat, kneel down and pray, feeling I was honored to seek God's blessing there. Although she was largely forgotten by the late 20th century, the impact of her life on those around her was incalculably diffusive.
They Also Served is researched, written, and hosted by Heidi Olson Campbell. Thank you to our guest on today's episode, Dr. Donny Chrissutianto. This episode was produced by Heidi Olson Campbell and Heather Moore. They Also Served is edited by Nina Vallado. Cover art and social media is by Chelsea Ernina. Stephen Husett is our equipment extraordinaire, and this show was executive produced by Adam Fenner. Thank you to the Adventist Learning Community for making They Also Served possible.